I'm recording. Okay. All right. I just want to make sure that I'm recording. I think that I am.
Good.
It's looking good. Yes. Okay. So anyway, I was saying I can't believe that it's already November and I went back in the archives and we started doing our leading labs in November of 2021. That's so fun. So, I mean, I can't believe it's been this long. So this is my plea is on December 5th. Was doing a session yesterday and I said, please come to my party. So on December 5th, it's in the morning. So we'll get you out. So if you've got some kind of holiday party you got to get to that night, we'll have you out of there by 12:30 at the latest. And I'll tell you, it's going to be a really fun morning. We combined our Leading Lab Live with our book launch party, and I just am over the moon for everybody who gets to come to that. And it's going to be a morning though. We're doing something kind of unique and different. We're going to be going through the 7 strategies that are in the book, but we're also going to be doing some fun, kind of unique interactive exercises through the morning. All that will culminate into a give back that we're doing for the 24-hour club in Dallas. And the 24-hour club is essentially kind of a last stop for people who are needing, well, I hate to say last stop. Who are we to say what's the last stop? But it's a stop for people who are needing help with addiction, alcoholism, and it's a really awesome uh, nonprofit that we have in Dallas. So we're giving them some things, and so it's just real exciting to learn, to connect with others, to celebrate an accomplishment, and then to be able to give back. And I can guarantee you that if you're hearing this invite, you had a part in this book. And so it's not just my celebration, it's all of our celebration. And I would love to have you there. So I'm an eye on disc. I like to be liked. So please come to my party. Okay. This year in the Leading Lab, we've been going through the 7 strategies in different ways. But the focus today is, I would say, a common denominator to all of those strategies. And it really is pausing and taking a look at gratitude. I think it is honestly the most untapped potential in boosting our entire lives. You know, previously, before we had all the good research, it would be considered something that's happy clappy, touchy feely. But there's so much science to show that there are so many benefits of gratitude to productivity and to living your best life. And so, anyway, I've got chat open, and I always just love to say, if you don't mind, if you've got access, if you're not driving, just pop in there, let us know oh, Nancy, that was your wedding song. That's so awesome. Uh, wish I could have been there. And so, if you don't mind just popping in there and let us know where you're coming in from, that's always neat and always a good way to build connection. I don't always do a lot of breakout rooms with our leading lab because I know that there are a lot of people, well, 2 things, a lot of people driving, and then it's an easy way to bug out when we put you in a breakout room, and I don't want you to do that. So we always leave chat open. But I wanted to start with this idea of gratitude, and I pulled some of my favorite quotes about gratitude. We're going to take a look at a few words around gratitude, but then we're going to dig into a TED Talk in sort of a unique way. I've watched this TED Talk, I could probably guess maybe close to 1,000 times. Not necessarily proud of that, but every single time I watch it, I pick out something new. It's a great reminder of the power of gratitude. And that I think the coolest thing about that is we can control that. So a few quotes that I love is what you appreciate. appreciates. The opposite is true too, isn't it? Like your brain's a universal I spy. If you've got something that you're complaining about, you'll find more opportunity to complain about it. But what you appreciate appreciates. Gratitude is the acknowledgement of what we have received and want to give back in some way. We've now asked hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people what makes a leader worth following. And I would say that if I had to find a universal answer, it is that leaders worth following, are pursuing the best version of themselves and helping others do the same. And that folds right into this idea of just being aware of all that we've received and wanting to give it back in some way. When I finished my PhD like 100 years ago, and the dinosaurs crossed the stage. But before we walked out, I mean, out of all the things I remember, they told us two things. And one of those is that society has been good to you. Go be good to society. And I'll never forget that. It really stuck with me. The other thing that they told us is that doctor is what other people call you. If you have to, if you have to announce it, then you're not showing up maybe the way you should. This is one of my favorite Bible verses. Whatever is true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, if anything is worthy of praise, anything, dwell on these things. You may have seen the movie Apollo 13, where everything is going down and the media is there to criticize and such. And if you remember the Gene Kranz character, he pauses, everybody's complaining, and he says, "What do we have here that's good?" And that was his starting point. Uh, Sean Aker, that's the TED Talk we're going to watch in a minute, says we're finding it's not the big things, the macro things that matter, but it's the tiny choices for happiness that actually sustain happiness the best. This is an interesting TED Talk out there as well. The word thank and think come from the same root word, thonk, Thonc. I don't know if you've used that word lately, but the point is that the better the thanking or the greater the thanking, the better the thinking. So there's even a benefit of starting your meetings, starting classes, starting your day in gratitude because it actually elevates your thinking. This is a quote that I also love, which is by Viktor Frankl, and we all know what he went through. And not only went through all of that, in the concentration camps, but shortly before he died, I think it was Madoff, took all of his money, the whole fortune that he had made. And for him to be able to continue to hang on, that it's the last of the human freedoms is our ability to choose in any given situation. And then, probably the most philosophical of all is Piglet. And Piglet noticed that even though he had a very small heart, it could hold a rather large amount of gratitude. So those are just some of my favorites. Some of us learn to read with Dick and Jane, and some of you don't even know what I'm talking about. But Dick and Jane was actually used in textbooks as a reader from like the 1930s to the 1980s. So 5 decades of people learned in some way to read with Dick and Jane. And there was one dominant word in this book series, and it was look. And I think that's so powerful. We get so distracted and so busy, we simply forget sometimes to just look and see, what is it that we have to be grateful for? And so before we jump into the TED Talk, which I'm breaking up in sections, and I just wanted you to take a minute and reflect, like, When you look within, what's one thing you're grateful for about your body, your mind right now? And looking ahead, like what's one thing that you're grateful for about today or this week? To take a minute to look behind, what's one thing you're grateful for about yesterday or this past weekend? And then finally, what's one thing around you that you're grateful for? It literally does have the power to actually increase your brain's ability to solve problems, to see solutions, to drown out some of those distractions, to move through, to keep going. And is this idea of gratitude. All right, so just taking a look at what it means, why it matters, and then how can we better live it out? Because we know that one common denominator of really high performing people is they really do maintain a sense of gratitude. So a few words that come to my mind when I think about gratitude, one was gift. Gratitude really is a gift, and so I had to dig into what is that? What does the word gift really mean? And what it means is something that we're not owed and we're not entitled to, and we didn't earn it, and that's essentially a gift. I think that's a beautiful word of just as we especially enter this holiday season. Again, the word thanks and think come from the same word. And if you were to look up the original meaning of thanks, it is, I'll remember what you have done for me. And I think what a cool reminder as we enter Thanksgiving of just taking a pause to maybe look around, look behind, look ahead, and really remember some of those gifts that we didn't earn and we weren't owed. So here's the word thonk. If you actually want to go watch her talk, it's good. How thanking awakens our thinking. And then my final word back here is this idea of dwell. It is fascinating. The word dwell has three different meanings, but boy, are they powerful. Because if we're being encouraged to find anything good and to dwell on that, what does it mean to dwell? Well, the first meaning of dwell is to take inventory. So I've never worked. Some of you have. Like I know that the food bank every year takes inventory and it's all hands on deck when they're taking inventory of all their food. But when you take inventory, you think about you're taking a meticulous, it's a methodical process. You are taking record of everything you have in the house or in the building or in the store. So that's a pretty cool definition. When you think about if there's anything worthy of praise, like take inventory of that. Another definition of dwell is a dwelling, like I choose to live here. It's gratitude is a place I choose to live. That's where I've set up residence. I don't live in Ain't It Awfulville, you know. Like, so I choose to dwell in gratitude. You can live anywhere. I live there. And then the third definition is to chew. I found that really interesting. But then when you think about if you're chewing something that's really hard to chew, it takes effort. It's going to be intentional. It's not something you can just throw down your throat. Like you're going to have to put some effort and some muscle into it. It's intention. And so my final word here is gratitude is intentional. And intention, you should hear the word tension in it, means a stretching out, straining, some level of exertion. So it is something that you've got to be intentional about. And we know that so many studies of people that start their day with some kind of gratitude practice. Like there's a long-term return to that. Anyway, so any thoughts from the gang about any of these words that resonate with you by chance? You can put it in chat or unmute. Okay. The universal facilitation rule on virtual sessions is 10 seconds. So they're just so good. Such great words. So when I came across this talk, I've shown it a lot. And we're just going to break it down into some sections and then take a minute to discuss in between. But here's Sean Achor talking about the happiness advantage and giving you the science behind why this is actually to our advantage to put it to use. Okay, can everybody hear okay?
When I was 7 years old and my sister was just 5 years old, we were playing on top of a bunk bed. I was 2 years older than my sister at the time. I mean, I'm 2 years older than her now, but at the time that meant she had to do everything that I wanted to do, and I wanted to play war. So we were up on top of our bunk beds, and on one side of the bunk bed I had put out all my G.I. Joe soldiers and weaponry, and on the other side were all my sister's Milos and ponies and ready for a cavalry charge. There are differing accounts of what actually happened that afternoon, but since my sister is not here with us today, let me tell you the true story. Which is my sister is a little bit on the clumsy side, and somehow, without any help or push from her older brother at all, suddenly Amy disappeared off of the top of the bunk bed and landed with us crash on the floor. And I nervously peered over the side of the bed to see what had befallen my fallen sister, and saw that she had landed painfully on her hands and knees on all fours on the ground. I was nervous because my parents had charged me with making sure that my sister and I played as safely and as quietly as possible. And seeing as how I had accidentally broken Amy's arm just 1 week before, heroically pushing her out of the way of an oncoming imaginary sniper bullet, for which I have yet to be thanked. I was trying as hard as I could. She didn't even see it coming. I was trying as hard as I could to be on my best behavior, and I saw my sister's face this wail of pain and suffering and surprise, threatening to erupt from her mouth and threatening to wake my parents from the long winter's nap for which they had settled. So I did the only thing my little frantic 7-year-old brain could think to do to avert this tragedy. If you have children, you've seen this hundreds of times before. I said, Amy, wait, don't cry, don't cry. Did you see how you landed? No human lands on all fours like that. Amy, I think this means you're a unicorn. Now that was cheating, because there's nothing in the world my sister would want more than not to be Amy the hurt 5-year-old little sister, but Amy the special unicorn. Of course, this was an option that was open to her brain at no point in the past, and you could see on my poor, manipulated sister's face conflict, as her little brain attempted to devote resources to feeling the pain and suffering surprise she just experienced, or contemplating her newfound identity as a unicorn. And the latter won out. Instead of crying, instead of ceasing our play, instead of waking my parents with all the negative consequences that would have ensued for me, instead, a smile spread across her face, and she scrambled right back up onto the bunk bed with all the grace of a baby unicorn. With one broken leg. What we stumbled across at this tender age of just 5 and 7, we had no idea at the time, was something that was going to be at the vanguard of a scientific revolution occurring 2 decades later in the way that we look at the human brain. What we had stumbled across is something called positive psychology, which is the reason that I'm here today and the reason that I wake up every morning.
So we're going to come back to the rest of that just a second. But I love is I'm moving stuff out of the way to get to my thing. Hang on just a sec. Okay. So I love how this talks about the power of reframing. And when you think about this idea of reframing, your brain is a meaning-making machine. It is creating a story about everything that's around us. And just realizing, like in this image here, You could choose to see the vase, you could choose to see the silhouette, you could choose to see the beautiful young lady or the old woman, or you could choose to see the rainbow or the skeleton. They're both there. And just that ability to reframe a situation is so powerful because once our brain gives something meaning, that's going to drive the response and it's going to drive the outcome. I'm just curious, is there an example in our group of where you might have taken something, you could have given it whatever meaning you wanted, but you reframed it to be something that would allow you to stay into gratitude? Anything come to mind?
So for example, I had an employee that was suspended last week. So that takes me out of my role and puts me in their role. So instead of looking at that as an obstacle, I looked at it as a gratitude moment to step into their shoes and gain perspective from what they do on a day to day, and also refresh myself on some of the stuff I hadn't done in a while. So I looked at it as a moment of being grateful for that opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's really helped me to be able to handle that workload plus my workload with a smile on my face.
And your family's happier, Patty, that is a beautiful, beautiful example. Because in that moment, you could have given it whatever meaning you wanted. You could have given it oh, they've overloaded me again, woe is me, and, moved into driving your BMW around. Everybody knows what that is, right? Bitching, moaning, and whining. But you chose not to. I just think that's a great, great, great example. Okay, I'm moving us forward. All right. So part two of this.
Talk about this research outside of academia, out with companies and schools. The very first thing they said to never do is to start your talk with a graph. The very first thing I wanted to do is start my talk with a graph. This graph looks boring, but this graph is the reason that I get excited and wake up every morning. And this graph doesn't even mean anything. It's fake data. What we found is if I got this data back studying you here in the room, I would be thrilled because there's very clearly a trend that's going on there, and that means that I can get published, which is all that really matters. The fact that there's one weird red dot that's up above the curve, there's one weird in the room, you know who you are, I saw you earlier. That's no problem. That's no problem, as most of you know, because I can just delete that dot. I can delete that dot because that's clearly a measurement error, and we know that's a measurement error because it's messing up my data. So one of the very first things that we teach people in economics and statistics and business and psychology courses is how, in a statistically valid way, do we eliminate the weirdos? How do we eliminate the outliers? So that we can find the line of best fit, which is fantastic if I'm trying to find out how many Advil the average person should be taking, too. But if I'm interested in potential, if I'm interested in your potential, or for happiness, or productivity, or energy, or creativity, what we're doing is we're creating the cult of the average with science. If I ask a question like, how fast can a child learn how to read in a classroom? Scientists change the answer to, how fast does the average child learn how to read in that classroom? And then we tailor the class right towards the average. Now, if you fall below the average on this curve, then psychologists get thrilled, because that means you're either depressed or you have a disorder, or hopefully both. We're hoping for both because our business model is if you come into a therapy session with one problem, we want to make sure you leave knowing you have 10. So you'll keep coming back over and over again. We'll go back into your childhood if necessary, but eventually what we want to do is to make you normal again. But normal is merely average. And what I posit, and what positive psychology posits, is that if we study what is merely average, we will remain merely average. Then instead of deleting those positive outliers, what I intentionally do is come into a population like this one and says, why? Why is it that some of you are so high above the curve in terms of your intellectual ability, athletic ability, musical ability, creativity, energy levels, your resiliency in the face of challenge, your sense of humor? Whatever it is, instead of deleting you, what I want to do is study you. Because maybe we can glean information, not just how to move people up to the average, but how we can move the entire average up at our companies and schools worldwide. The reason this graph is important to me is when I turn on the news, it seems like the majority of the information is not positive. In fact, it's negative. Most of it's about murder, corruption, diseases, natural disasters, and very quickly, my brain starts to think that's the accurate ratio of negative to positive in the world. What that's doing is creating something called the medical school syndrome, which if you know people who have been to medical school during the first year of medical training, as you read through a list of all the symptoms and diseases that could happen, suddenly you realize you have all of them. I have a brother-in-law named Bobo, which is a whole nother story. Bobo married Amy the unicorn. Bobo called me on the phone from Yale Medical School. And Bobo said, "Sean, I have leprosy." Which even at Yale is extraordinarily rare. But I had no idea how to console poor Bobo because he had just gotten over an entire week of menopause. See, what we're finding is not necessarily the reality that shapes us, but the lens through which your brain views the world that shapes your reality. And if we can change the lens, not only can we change your happiness, we can change every single educational and business outcome at the same time.
So I want to pause with that for just a second. So I am making sure that I can see everybody. Hang on just a second. I got some weird stuff going on my screen. I think about this idea of when he says in that clip, in what ways do we settle for what is merely average? And, not to hate on social media exactly, but it's so easy. I don't know about you, but it's so easy for us to allow that and allow that algorithm that's continuing to feed more and more and more of the same thing. It does start to feel like that's the real world. Or as he says, if you turn on the news, you start to feel like, that all the negativity and the polarization and division is normal. But if we study what is average, that we remain merely average. Any thoughts about that from our group? Like, is it, as you think about that, how have you seen just the increase of these influences keeping us average?
Personally, for myself, Sherry, I have went through, 8 years now of just no social media and then only watching the news for the weather. And that has really equipped me not to be so consumed by worldly views.
Yeah. It is so easy to fall into the comparison to the, and then he says, if we can change your lens, it's the lens through which you view the world. If we can change the lens, we can change the outcomes. The power of that. And, we know that high performers in general don't roll over in the morning, open up their phone and let, random things take their energy. Good for you, Patty. And it's a nest, like, I'm not hating on it or anything like that because it's not all bad. But we have to be careful. We are being manipulated to death. And, just really coming back to this idea of I want to set the course for my day. I want to tell my day where it goes and how it's going to go before it tells me where it went and how it went. It matters that much. We're talking about human potential here. And all it takes for your brain is a little bit of uncertainty to shut it down. And I think the greatest unexplored possibility is not what's around the Titanic or what's on Mars, but what's human potential capable of. I'm not even sure we've really tapped into that. So I don't know. I mean, I do love the movie The Matrix. I don't feel like we're living in the Matrix exactly, but in some ways, just pausing and reflecting and saying, how have I allowed some of these things to impact my human potential? Like, am I able to accomplish all that I'm here to do? Yeah. Any other thoughts about that? And I'm moving forward.
One thing that occurs to me is my wife's in public education, and she says not only is the pressure to focus on improving the average or focus on the average, but actually the lowest performing. So they're actually managing the classroom to the lower performing, which even pulls the average down. which is an interesting concept. I suppose the alternative is the concept of bright spots that Dan and Chip Heath have in Switch, right? Where you focus on those positive outliers, which is kind of what the speaker was commenting on as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's another good book. Another good book. Yeah. So here's the next part. Okay.
When I applied to Harvard, I applied on a dare. I didn't expect to get in, and my family had no money for college. When I got a military scholarship 2 weeks later that allowed me to go, suddenly something that wasn't even a possibility became a reality. When I went there, I assumed everyone else would see it as a privilege as well, that they'd be excited to be there. Even if you're in a classroom full of people smarter than you, you'd be happy just to be in that classroom, which is what I felt. But what I found there is while some people experienced that, when I graduated after my 4 years and then spent the next 8 years living in the dorms with the students, Harvard asked me to. Wasn't that guy. But what happened, I was an officer of Harvard to counsel students through the difficult 4 years, and what I found in my research and my teaching is that these students, no matter how happy they were with the original success of getting into the school, 2 weeks later their brains were focused not on the privilege of being there, nor on their philosophy or their physics. Their brain was focused on the competition, the workload, the hassles, the stresses, the complaints. When I first went in there, I walked into the freshman dining hall, which is where my friends from Waco, Texas, which is where I grew up, I know some of you have heard of it. When they come to visit me, they look around, they say, this freshman dining hall looks like something out of Hogwarts from the movie Harry Potter, which it does. This is Hogwarts from the movie Harry Potter, and that's Harvard. And when they see this, they say, Sean, why do you waste your time studying happiness at Harvard? Seriously, what does a Harvard student possibly have to be unhappy about? Embedded within that question is the key to understanding the science of happiness. Because what that question assumes is that our external world is predictive of our happiness levels. When in reality, if I know everything about your external world, I can only predict 10% of your long-term happiness. 90% of your long-term happiness is predicted not by the external world, but by the way your brain processes the world. And if we change it, if we change our formula for happiness and success, what we can do is change the way that we can then affect reality.
I just pausing a second with that. When he says that 90% of your happiness is predicted not by your external world, but by how your brain processes the world. And I just want you to just reflect on how you might have seen that in your own life. Because I'm going to challenge you, because I know you guys, right? We get to work with high performers like you all the time. And this is what it might look like. You get that promotion and you give your brain a millisecond to celebrate, and then the next thought is, let's make it hard. Or you get that contract, or you got that grant, whatever, and the next second we bring the hard into it. And when he says that one line around, what would a Harvard student possibly have to be unhappy about? Y'all, we could fill that in with anything. What would a American citizen, what would a employee of your company, what would someone who is healthy, whatever, possibly have to be unhappy about? And just, thinking about how I've seen that in my own life, because in this next section, he's talking about what we do is continuously move the goalpost of happiness. And what happens is you wake up at the end of your life and you never got there. It was always the next thing when I get the next thing. So I'm gonna move that forward just a sec here in this section.
What we found is that only 25% of job successes are predicted by IQ. 75% of job successes are predicted by your optimism levels, your social support, and your ability to see stress as a challenge instead of as a threat. I talked to a boarding school up in New England, probably the most prestigious boarding school, and they said, we already know that. So every year, instead of just teaching our students, we also have a wellness week, and we're so excited. Monday night, we have the world's leading expert coming in to speak about adolescent depression. Tuesday night is school violence and bullying. Wednesday night's eating disorders, Thursday night is illicit drug use, and Friday night we're trying to decide between risky sex or happiness. I said that's most people's Friday nights. which I'm glad you liked, but they did not like that at all. Silence on the phone. And into the silence, I said, I'd be happy to speak at your school, but just so you know, that's not a wellness week, that's a sickness week. What you've done is you've outlined all the negative things that can happen, but not talked about the positive. The absence of disease is not health. Here's how we get to health. We need to reverse the formula for happiness and success. In the past 3 years, I've traveled to 45 different countries, working with schools and companies in the midst of an economic downturn. And what I found is that most companies and schools follow a formula for success, which is this: if I work harder, I'll be more successful. And if I'm more successful, then I'll be happier. That undergirds most of our parenting styles, our managing styles, the way that we motivate our behavior. And the problem is, it's scientifically broken and backwards for 2 reasons. First, every time your brain has a success, you just change the goalpost of what success looked like. You got good grades, now you have to get better grades. You got into a good school, now you have to get a better school. You got a good job, now you have to get a better job. You hit your sales target, we're going to change your sales target. And if happiness is on the opposite side of success, your brain never gets there. What we've done is we've pushed happiness over the cognitive horizon as a society. And that's because we think we have to be successful, then we'll be happier. But the real problem is our brains work in the opposite order. If you can raise somebody's level of positivity in the present, then their brain experiences what we now call a happiness advantage, which is your brain at positive performs significantly better than it does at negative, neutral, or stressed. Your intelligence rises, your creativity rises, your energy levels rise. In fact, what we found is that every single business outcome improves. Your brain at positive is 31% more productive than your brain at negative, neutral, or stressed. You're 37% better at sales. Doctors are 19% faster, more accurate at coming up with the correct diagnosis when positive instead of negative, neutral, or stressed, which means we can reverse the formula. If we can find a way of becoming positive in the present, then our brains work even more successfully as we're able to work harder, faster, and more intelligently. What we found.
So I wanted to touch on that because, listen, you know, if we're all being honest here, when you're in the funk, the last thing sometimes you feel like doing is raising your level of positivity. And I mean, there's value, like feel your feels, but just know that if I'm staying there, I'm actually working against, I'm not giving my brain that positive, that happiness advantage that he's talking about. I mean, you think about it. I don't know if you have Monday morning anxiety or Sunday night anxiety. I sometimes do. And or if you know you learned that that contract you thought you were going to get or that promotion you thought you were going to get is not coming through, like that's the last thing that you feel like doing. But your thoughts lie and you don't have to believe every one of them, you know, and just because something feels true doesn't make it so. I just want to share a couple of other really cool studies that have happened. We know that practices of gratitude can lower cortisol by 23%. So in this particular study, these were people that were in a high stress situation. One of those being a hospital system in Florida. I don't know, remember a few years ago there was a shooting in one of the bars there, and uh, because because the staff, actually, I think Sean Acor had been working with them, but because they had a gratitude practice as a team, it actually lowered their cortisol in that horrific moment where all these people are being brought into the ER by 23%. It lowers the risk of cardiovascular disease by 15%. A few other important studies here is that you also release dopamine, which is the feel-good chemical that also allows you to focus. So it allows you to minimize distractions. Serotonin is kind of that calming chemical. It also allows us to take some fat off our waistline. So the more stress we're under, the more likely we are to gain weight around the waistline. So reduced fat by having a practice of gratitude. I think this is just astounding. You're not going to see this commercial, you know, during the Super Bowl for the pharmaceutical company, but practices of gratitude reduced feelings of hopelessness by 88% and increased optimism by 94%. I mean, it's just crazy to think, why don't we immediately go to a practice of gratitude? Because it feels counter and it feels opposite of what you want to do. but it also activates the prefrontal cortex, which allows us to connect more with individuals, to see from different perspectives, to be more creative and more innovative, and then it lights up the reward system and it actually levels out some hormonal imbalances by having practices of gratitude. So this is the final section of his talk.
What we need to be able to do is to reverse this formula so we can start to see what our brains are actually capable of. Because dopamine, which floods into your system when you're positive, has two functions. Not only does it make you happier, it turns on all the learning centers in your brain, allowing you to adapt to the world in a different way. We've found that there are ways you can train your brain to be able to become more positive. In just a 2-minute span of time, done for 21 days in a row, we can actually rewire your brain, allowing your brain to actually work more optimistically and more successfully. We've done these things in research now in every single company that I've worked with, getting them to write down 3 new things that they're grateful for 21 days in a row, 3 new things each day. And at the end of that, their brain starts to retain a pattern of scanning the world not for the negative, but for the positive first. Journaling about one positive experience you've had over the past 24 hours allows your brain to relive it. Exercise teaches your brain that your behavior matters. We find that meditation allows your brain to get over the cultural ADHD that we've been creating by trying to do multiple tasks at once, and allows our brains to focus on the task at hand. And finally, random acts of kindness or conscious acts of kindness. We get people, when they open up their inbox, to write one positive email praising or thanking somebody in their social support network. And by doing these activities and by training your brain just like we train our bodies, what we found is we can reverse the formula for happiness and success, and in doing so, not only create ripples of positivity, but create a real revolution. Thank you very much. What we need to be able to do is...
if you want to watch this again and again and again, the way that I have, it's available. You can just Google Sean Aker. He has 2 books. I'm sure he has more, but 2 that I really love. One is Happiness Advantage, and the other one is Big Potential. And just good reminders. Man, might be a good thing you could do this very thing with your team, between now and sometime over the holidays, to think about how are we incorporating gratitude practices as a team, because maybe that's the way you start all your meetings in 2026, or maybe it's something that you have a gratitude challenge with your team. Anytime you guys are here, and if you think I want to figure out a way to integrate more of this into my life or with my team, all you got to do is reach out to us. We'll find a time to jump on a call and talk about how you can do that. But I know it's 8:45. We always hang around if anybody wants to. But here's my final invite for those of you who weren't on earlier. This is a day, it's a morning. It's a morning. We're going to let you out by noon or noon 30. But we're going to learn together. We're going to celebrate together. And then we're going to put some things together to give back to the community on December 5th. So please come to my party if you can. And if you think we really, the goal here was not to make any money. It was just kind of maybe to cover some of our expenses here. So if you look at the registration and you're like, I just can't do that right now. 25's been hard for a lot of people. So if you're like, I just can't do that right now, that's okay. Come anyway. All right. Well, you can come for free. So, and we'll let you sit at there's no VIP table, but maybe we can make one that day. We just want to see you there because, again, if you're in this session, if you're listening to this session, you had a part in this, and we just want to celebrate with you. So thank you guys for being here. I just appreciate it so much. And we'll be talking soon, and we hang around if anybody wants to. But otherwise, let's get out there and let's make a difference today. And because if the better you are, the better everybody around you is. So thanks so much for being here.